Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show Podcast Network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the frankly over budget of movies either starring about or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a video artist and regular writer for the Geek Show, and I've been joined this week by.
You've been joined by Mark Conliffe, who is also a regular writer for The Geek Show. He's also written for We Are Cult, Horrified, Z Network. What else have I written for, Graham?
Scarred for Life. You're in Scarred
for Life Volume 2, yeah. I should also say Volume 3 is out now, which is very good.
Yes.
What else have I written for? Arrow Film, Arrow Blu-ray,
yes.
Essays for Arrow Film, and also Temporal Boundary Press.
Yeah, you haven't had a chance to say that one on the show before, have you?
I think I have, yeah. I think I have. It's the fanzine for like hauntological stuff.
Oh, yeah. Lovely. So, yeah, we don't normally do tribute episodes to people who've died recently on Pop Screen. And in fairness, this was never going to be a tribute episode. No. I had a rare chance to see the director's cut of this movie on the big screen at one of the great independent cinemas Britain has, the Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle. And I went to it because I thought, when are you going to get the chance to watch Heaven's Gate on a big screen again? And then literally the day after that, it was announced that Kris Kristofferson had died.
Sad and spooky. I had a very similar thing once. Well, no, not really, because we're talking about really... Well, no, he was really good, but the film was... I watched Cool Runnings back in the 90s as a teenager. Came back home and news at 10 was on. It's John Candy's died.
Right.
I've just watched him. How could that possibly be?
Extraordinary, yeah.
Was that quite spooky.
Was that formative? Was that like the first time you realised that, films aren't just records of things that happened last week? They take a while to make.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. It just brings you up a bit short, doesn't it, when you see somebody like 35 foot, on screen in front of you, and then like you've just said, no, they're dead now, and it's like, I've just watched him. It's very strange, but yeah, I imagine you must have felt pretty similar.
It was quite eerie, yeah, because I mean, despite being a big fan of country and western, which is to say a big hate of modern chart country and western, I hadn't really delved much into Kristofferson's recorded work. I'm starting to now and really enjoying it. But I did know him as an actor. He's always had a really good, steady acting career over the decades. And also, I kind of like, there was a tweet that went viral after his death when everyone was sharing amazing bits from his autobiography and from interviews with him and things other people have said about him, and said, can in the future, when someone's really fucking great, can we make that known before they die, please?
Yeah, it seemed like a best kept secret, didn't it?
Yeah.
In a really weird way. Even, it's like, I mean, I think he said himself, if I was a redneck, I'm sure I could sell a hell of a lot more records,
Totally.
But that's not who I am. But the general sort of consensus of Kris Kristofferson was that sort of he belonged in, and maybe that's just us being slightly ignorant of country music, certainly over here, and we just tar it all with the same brush.
Not all of us.
Not all of but maybe it is just a kind of like just people not doing the homework, not doing the research, and just because I mean I know growing up we had Kris Kristofferson albums, my mum and dad were quite into country, neighbours were quite into country, so you'd hear his music, but I knew him, like you say, I knew him more as an actor. I knew him more from like Convoy and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid and stuff like that, rather than an actual recording artist. Or A Star Is Born. That was another one, wasn't it?
Yes. In his later years, of course, he was in the Blade movies.
Yeah, that was the big sort of. I think that was probably around the time where I did start going, I need to look into who this person is, because that's sort of like the tail end of the 90s, isn't it, Blade?
Yeah.
And I remember the early 90s with the Bob Dylan concert and Sinead O'Connor and thinking, that's the only decent man in that fucking room right now, So I was really interested in him.
Yeah, we had
from that
discussed that before on our podcast about the Butcher Boy.
We did, yeah. You've got a better memory than me, yeah. Which may show in this podcast, but
yeah. It's quite hard to do research for Heaven's Gate listeners, because by the time you finished watching it, the start is quite a long way in the past.
How long is the director's cut?
The director's cut is just shy of 3 hours 40 minutes.
What's that in
219 minutes.
Yeah, I have got that on Blu-ray somewhere. Probably downstairs, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I have it on Blu-ray as well. Yeah.
So I have seen it, but I did used to have VHS, which was just like some sort of studio cut, which was just 2.5 hours, something like that, I think.
Yeah.
So it obviously gutted quite a bit out of it, didn't it?
It's funny that I haven't seen the studio cut. We will talk about it a bit more as we get more into the behind the scenes stuff here, but I haven't seen it, but I have read like the breakdown of what's gone. And while it would never be my preferred version of it, and while I do like a lot of the things they've cut, there isn't like a bit of it that made me think, oh, that's scandalous. It sounds like it was done pretty judiciously, pretty carefully.
Very possibly. Because I mean, the big sort of it's very hard to talk about Heaven's Gate, isn't it? Because there's so much baggage around the film itself, so it's very hard to sift through it. There's a lot and contrasting opinions of it as well. But I don't think the studio might have been very much against what he was doing, Michael Cimino, we should say. But I don't think they were out to just bury the film. There was too much money involved to just bury the film. So I can totally understand that there must have been some painstaking care and judicious cutting to it. I don't think anybody just went, well, just slash this to pieces and just chuck it out and not whole. I think they shot themselves in the foot by just slagging it off while it was being made, for sure. But I don't think anybody set out to say, let's make a movie that will make no money.
You see, I've read Final Cut, the very famous book about the production of this by Stephen Back, who I forget what exactly his position was, but he was very high up at United Artists. And I think if people know one thing about Heaven's Gate, it's that it bankrupted United Artists. And that is seismic, that very rarely happens to studios. The fact that it happened to United Artists of all the studios, a studio so venerable that it was co-founded by Charlie Chaplin. It's a huge story. And so you pick up Final Cut thinking this is going to be like a really gossipy, bitchy book by a man who has a lot of axes to grind. And that is totally not what it is. It could not be nicer. It could not be more like firm in its conviction that Cimino is a great artist and that United Artists were right to back Heaven's Gate. They were just wrong in the way that the production was managed. It's not something like, is it The Devil's Candy, the book about the making of Brian De Palma's Bonfire of the Vanities.
Bonfire of the Vanities, yeah. I've never read that. I'm tempted to read it because...
that is a very funny book.
The thing with that is, if I do read it, I'll have to watch Bonfire of the Vanities again. And I saw that in the 90s, and I don't really want to do that again.
Yeah, but that is the thing, isn't it? Because, like, Bonfire of the Vanities is, I mean, I don't care much for Tom Wolfe's politics, but the novel is great. I think the novel is a really great work of that era's literature. And it's like, the film has its revisionist fans, but no one's ever going to put it at the front rank of De Palma's work. You are watching something that is bastardized and commercialized, and as such, it feels okay to kind of poke around in the dirty laundry of like how this mess got made. But Heaven's Gate, whether you love it or hate it, and I can understand why some people hate it, it is a major, uncompromised work of art.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I have a thing. I think I say it on my last Letterboxd review, is that my rating for Heaven's Gate, I'm being quite glib here. I say my ratings for Heaven's Gate could change depending on what day I watch Heaven's Gate. But given that I've reviewed it twice in my 12 years on Letterboxd, and on each time I've rated it 5.5 stars, 4.5 stars, I should say. I think I'm talking out my arse when I say that my ratings could change.
Yeah.
I think it is a piece of art. I think we see the brushstrokes. I think that's the problem. We see the imperfections. You know, it's not. But then, does a piece of art have to be perfect? You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose that's a really hypothetical question you could discuss forever, really, because it's not a perfect film. But then I would still say it's Cimino's best because I don't like The Deer Hunter.
I think you might be right there. Yeah, I mean, The Deer Hunter, it's interesting the way that these things kind of jockey for position. I should point out that I really love Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and it's like...
Yeah. That is
it's a great movie, but it is kind of outside of what people think of when they think of this director. It's like, maybe it's not as personal, I don't know, but I love the film.
You think of the big epics, don't you? You think of The Deer Hunter, you think of Heaven's Gate, you think of is it The Sicilian with Christophe Lambert?
Yeah.
Now I watched that again recently. It is fucking terrible. It has the problem of Christophe. Is it Christopher or Christoph? It used to be Christopher, didn't it? But I think he prefers Christoph now.
I do not know. No,
it has the problem of casting him, and he has never been cast correctly in any film he's ever appeared in. He's miscast so many times. You know, we'll cast him as Tarzan. Fine if you're having him scrabbing about with nothing on, going ooh 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 ah ah ah. But then you try and convince him as an English aristocrat at the end of the film. You're like, this isn't working. You know? And then, I mean,
he kind of works in Highlander because that's a whole film of people who were hilariously miscast.
Oh,
it
absolutely.
It just works somehow.
Cast a Frenchman playing a Scotsman and a Scotsman playing a Spanish Egyptian. Yeah. It's just perfect. But I saw him in a film recently called, oh God, I can't remember what it's called. To Kill a Priest. Which was about the solidarity movement in Poland in the 80s. And he's a Polish priest in it. Completely miscast. It doesn't help that the filmmakers decide to do a film about solidarity and don't mention the union in it at all. So you'd be forgiven for thinking it was a religious movement rather than a working class union movement. Obviously to appease like American audiences, I guess. But then to sort of say, well, you know, this priest is based on a real priest, but we're not going to call him by his real name.
Based on an actual priest.
Based on a real priest who doesn't fiddle with children. Is it sure he's real then? But he got murdered by the Polish communist authorities, and the whole film is just like Christ, it's the whole. And then you've got Ed Harris, who he's like the chief of secret police, and you just wait for him to do this, the sort of, truly this man was the son of God. But it's Christopher Lambert, who's just not charismatic at all. It's just clearly a man who is French while everybody else is English or American around him, and nobody mentions it at all.
In terms of the later Cimino films, though, I've seen the remake he did of The Desperate Hours with Mickey Rourke, which is like a fine film. It's forgettable, but there's nothing actively wrong with it. But it does point out what I think is interesting is that for someone who, in many accounts, was a despot, a tyrant who, terrorized his actors, making this unwatchable, over-budget vanity project, people stayed loyal to him. You can look at the cast list of Heaven's Gate, and you will see a lot of people who went on to appear in another Michael Cimino film.
That's true, yeah. And of course, Walken is in Deer Hunter, and
Deer
straight,
Hunter
he didn't, he came straight back for it. I can
Yeah.
say I prefer this to Deer Hunter, but then I'm the sort of person who likes Deer Hunter in the first act, when it's just about a load of steelworkers coming to a Russian Orthodox wedding. I enjoy that bit. I don't like the whole racist dehumanization and demonization of Vietnamese people. So give me that first act, I'm fine.
It's interesting because, like, Heaven's Gate, I always feel, is jockeying for position with certain other movies. And I think as the stock of one of them falls, the stock of Heaven's Gate rises. You mentioned the Deer Hunter. There was backlash against the Deer Hunter's portrayal of Vietnam at the time. Jane Fonda called it a racist Pentagon depiction of the war. But over time, for a while, it was accepted as being the masterpiece that he then, ran out his credit of with this. But, there are, I think, more people who are critical of the Deer Hunter now. And as people have become more critical of that film, I think people have looked at this film and said, wait, why was one of these reviled and one of these lauded?
It's actually quite interesting to think that it's by the same filmmaker in a way, because other than like a really bloated runtime and some very artistic shots, the politics are completely different. Like you say, there's no way Jane Fonda can criticize. I mean, Jane Fonda can rightly say that the Deer Hunter is racist, but this is firmly on the side of immigrant labor, really, isn't it? In a way that, for me, people say it's not historically accurate. Now, I have to say, I don't know a huge amount about the is it the Lincoln
Johnson
County War. I don't know a huge amount of it. Is it so? But then again, I'm not really concerned it is 100% accurate, because I think its truth is more important than the accuracy here, because there will have been immigrant farmers. Now, whether they were all immigrant farmers that were targeted, I don't know. But I think it speaks. I think what Cimino's doing here is looking for comparisons in recent history. He's looking at the way that Nazi Germany sort of had, just state-sponsored anti-Semitism in the 30s. He's looking at the Red Menace scare in Hollywood and America in the 50s, which is completely different politics from what somebody who has just made a film that a stalwart of Hollywood has called, a Pentagon version. You just don't expect that. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating way to approach the whole incident, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think the actual facts of the Johnson County War are sort of irrelevant here. I think the key to looking at it, in my view, is that the rumor, spoiler warning, by the way, if you haven't seen Heaven's Gate, maybe skip on a bit, but the death of Ella, the Isabelle Huppert character, was like, a lot of historians believe that the rumor that she owned a whorehouse and like traded cattle for sex was like a rumor that was developed by people who wanted to justify her murder. And it's like, okay, so it's a Print the Legend movie. Now, you, the generalized you, have not had a problem with that for the preceding, 60, 70 years of Western cinema.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of a sticking point. And I think, yeah, while Heaven's Gate would never have been a success because the pre-publicity and the coverage of its shoot had been so extensive, and that this was in a lot of ways the first time that a story from the trade press about studio finances and budget overruns like bled through into the entertainment press. That would always have killed it. But I think its politics wouldn't have helped. And its politics were the thing that I was most startled about when I saw it, because that was an element that I don't think any preceding account of the film, which are mostly focused on the budget, had really it made clear to me.
I think that's a very valid point. And I think there are films, I mean, particularly in this era, New Hollywood, where it was just the Wunderkinds running the show,
Yeah.
that there are a lot of films that went over budget and beyond schedule. I mean, look at Apocalypse Now, but
Yes.
yet they don't get the scorn and condemnation. Okay, they didn't bankrupt a studio, but they weren't getting the nobody. It didn't feel like anybody was on their back as much as what seems to have been happening during the making of this film.
Yeah. And
And
I mean,
you do have to wonder if it is the politics, because
yeah.
one thing I always find really interesting about how we make epic movies, historical epics, and how America make historical epics is that we're not afraid of showing the crimes that British colonial history has perpetrated
Mm,
throughout the years. America don't really want to be seen, they don't want to point the finger at their mistakes or crimes
yeah,
in
yeah.
the same way that we do. We can make a film like Gandhi
Mm,
and show the horrible massacre that occurred, and we just go, yeah, colonial history was bad. We can do a film like A Bridge Too Far and show how much folly was involved in Operation Market Garden, and people just go, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we didn't get it right that time. But America being held up as being a racist country is not something they always tolerate very well. These things get buried very quickly, I think.
I
Especially in
think
a
it's
medium like especially in a medium like like the Western, where
yes.
it is it's the bulwark of American mythology, isn't it? It's the
Yeah.
traditional. We are the heroes. We are the people in the white hats, and this film isn't that at all.
No, no. And I think it's very appropriate what you said about it being more in line with the British epics, because I kept thinking, particularly during that first segment where they're at Harvard and they're graduating, which is like it's like the equivalent of the wedding in the Deer Hunter here, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Cimino
yeah.
likes
It's true, actually. Yeah,
his big hefty prologues, but I kept thinking this is a British film that happens to have been made by Americans. And later on, of course, I did read that Cimino was saying, I don't want to make a standard Western. I want to make the Dr. Zhivago of Westerns. I want to make
this
the
is it.
Lawrence of Arabia of Westerns. And
This
I think it's funny that the critics who were pushing the actual David Lean further and further into self-parody by just like lauding everything he came up with were so vitriolic towards the man who made a better stab than anyone else at being the American David Lean here.
And it's really true. And there are moments in this film that is astonishingly good, like David Lean, really like David Lean in his prime.
Yeah.
Astonishingly good filmmaking, beautiful filmmaking. The scene at Harvard, which was filmed in Oxford. There's a little bit of trivia in this, and
Oh.
I've looked and looked time and time again, and I can't see him. But apparently, Ian Hislop is an extra in there. Yeah, and I look all the time to see if I can spot him, and I can't see him. It's
There's a couple of notable extras. I don't know whether he was like hired as an extra or whether there was supposed to be a plot line involving him, but it got sort of either not filmed or cut down. But I think it's during the cockfighting scene you can spot Willem Dafoe in the
Oh,
crowd there.
right.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. Because he wasn't scrabbling around as a bit part actor back then, was he?
No, he hadn't done I don't know what exactly the first thing he did was. I can't think of a film that was earlier than what was the Catherine Bigelow one he did, The Loveless.
Oh,
I
right,
can't,
yeah.
yeah, I can't think of much earlier than that. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who would go on to be very famous in this.
Indeed, there is. Yeah. I was going to say the thing with that I don't like about Cimino is his casting isn't always great.
Mm,
And I was going to say, Christopher Lambert in The Sicilian is
Sicilian.
a prime example of that. He just does not convince.
It's the
Um,
funniest example of it, certainly. Yeah.
yeah, but then Isabelle Huppert in this is not. It's not this character, is it? And
Ah,
the
now.
studios were mental for they were desperate for him to get anybody other than her,
Yeah, yeah.
and he stuck to his guns. And you do wonder there's a sort of willful um, obstinacy regarding casting decisions that are very strange.
Well, I mean, I've arrived far too late to the party to turn the critical tide in favour of Heaven's Gate as a whole. But this is my revisionism. I'm going to say, despite all accounts that I have read, I think it was a great idea to cast Isabelle Huppert in this role. Like, it's good. It's a good decision.
Do you know what? I'm going to have to switch the light on in this room and let me give me time to gather my thoughts on
He's
this.
going to leave,
Yeah, I'm
listeners.
going
He's
to
going to
leave.
leave
This is
the
the moment.
podcast.
This is the moment, people, when I just go enough. I cannot cope with this French pandering nonsense. Didn't we vote? Didn't we vote leave for a reason? Up yours, Delors. Stick that in your baguette. No, putting the lights on because I'm realizing I'm getting darker and darker. You forget the nights are drawing in now, aren't they?
You
So I
do.
sat there, I caught a glimpse of myself there, and I thought, who's that man in the shadows? And I realised it was me. So it's not Pipes, is it? No. I don't know. I don't know. I did note some of the other casting decisions, and they would make more sense. Jane Fonda and Diane Keaton.
Right, hang on. Now, Fonda would have been good, but she'd have never done it because
No,
of the
because
aforesaid.
of Deer
Yeah,
Hunter. Yeah,
yeah.
Diane Keaton.
Disastrous.
Yeah,
Absolutely terrible idea.
can't see Diane Keaton as a leading lady in a western. Really.
No, not at all.
And I've never really talked to Diane Keaton in anything other than comedy. So
Yeah, yeah. It's
that's an
like
odd one.
there's that wonderful phrase that just seems to have settled into the popular consciousness now whenever some modern Hollywood actor is cast in a period drama and they just seem wrong. People say they've got a face that's seen an iPhone. And I don't know what the 70s version of that is. Like, is it a face that's seen a microwave oven, maybe? But
Hey, good one. Yeah, yeah.
maybe.
I'll
Yeah,
go with that.
Diane Keaton's definitely got that in any
Oh,
case.
she cooks digital all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's a horrible quote which which you'll know because you've just read Final Cut.
Mm.
Where Stephen Box said that Kristofferson and Walken are so much more attractive than she, up here is, that the audience will spend the entire film wondering why they're fucking her instead of each other. Now,
I mean,
that's a
there,
twatty comment.
aside from the rather rank sexism of that, there is a whole
Yeah,
generation of English film critics, I think, who will be like tumbling off their chair at the idea that someone doesn't fancy Isabelle Huppert.
it's just bizarre. I mean, I get it in terms of how the character is written. I just
Mm,
never really, I don't engage with the character in it, and I don't know whether that's her. And like I say, I think she's miscast. I don't know whether that. I think she's an incredible actress. I don't think she's
mm,
necessarily right for the role, but she's certainly better than Diane Keaton. Or
yeah.
whether it's just a really poorly written role.
Well, that is the thing. I mean, I think it is, and I think that having Huppert in it defamiliarizes it enough to get me at least to overlook the fact that, this is one of the worst cases on record of a Western where the female role is the woman.
Yeah.
And, there's one woman in it and she is archetypal. She's emblematic of all women. There's a good joke in one of her early scenes when she first gets together with Kris Kristofferson. He's eating a pie that she's made. And he's complimenting it and saying it's a really good pie, and they're sort of flirting, and eventually she's just overcome and she rips her clothes off and runs to the bedroom, and Kristofferson just like he looks after her and then just pauses and finishes the pie before he goes to join her.
Like a true Wiganer.
It's very funny, but it is sort of like, that is the limit of this character. That's why you should care about this character. She cooks well, she fucks well, and that's it.
It's true. It is true. It's not the greatest written character. But I thought it just occurred to me then as well, is if this whether, the other names that they sort of brought in, it should have been Jane Fonda, it should have been Diane Keaton. These are all American people, aren't they? Now I can't remember what the background of this character is, but it's a film about immigration, so
it's one of those
what's
classic
the problem?
I don't understand why that was a problem when it's one of those classic Western tropes that if you look back at the golden age Westerns, if you look back at something like Stagecoach or Destry Rides Again, the good time gal is always either played by a European actor like Marlene Dietrich, or they have a name like Frenchie or something like that. And it's like, it is a way of, letting the American audience know that we're not actually calling your great grandmother a whore. We're just saying it's like those European women. So
that's
it's one
true,
of the more
actually.
one of the more trad aspects in it. But I also think like there's a certain mystique to Huppert that she has been called the greatest living actress enough times for it to confer the sort of power on her. And it's not, I'm not like a Huppert cultist, but she is obviously very talented. And I think without the oddity of it being her, rather than Diane Keaton, rather than Jane Fonda, rather than Meryl Streep, who of course had worked with Cimino on Deer Hunter.
Good call,
It's like the strangeness of this role being filled by someone who would go on to play Madame Bovary for Claude Chabrol. The weirdness of thinking that she had to make time out from a Godard shoot to be in this is one of the things that drives people back to a film that a lot of people would prefer to be buried entirely.
And it speaks on a greater level of his whole sort of European sensibility. Because it is quite a, you could convince me easily that this is a European making a Western rather than it just feels like an outsider perspective, which is wholly right because it's a film about immigrant outsiders being victimized and prejudiced against. So it's wholly right, But then you've got people like John Hurt in it as well.
Can we just clear a space to speak dispatches about John Hurt as Billy Irvine? Because I think it's a majestic performance by a great, great, great actor.
Years ago, I was trying to tell somebody who professed to be really into movies, as particularly 70s Hollywood movies, to watch Heaven's Gate. I sort of gave him, it's a very hard film, this, to describe, because you describe it and it just sounds like a really shit pot boiler.
Which is probably how he got it funded, right?
Absolutely. Because I sort of said to him, right, it's Kris Kristofferson and it's John Hurt, and they both went to university together and they're both good mates, and then they find themselves on the other side of this war. It just sounds like a really bad pot boiler, doesn't it? Because it's the type of film that you then expect, right? So what? At the end, they face off against each other.
Yeah,
no, it's not this shit. It's not that shit film at all. I love the fact that this. He's such an important character, or so we're told. He's such an important character, but yet spoiler alert, he dies with a bullet that has no connotation whatsoever as to what his role or performance or a part in anybody's lives is. It's just violence in a maelstrom of violence. It's just
Yeah.
another indiscriminate killing in a whole battlefield of indiscriminate killing. And there's something very profound about that. But I also love the fact that, and I think I say it in my Letterboxd review as well, is that he is the Sebastian Flight
Yeah.
of the film, or if you want a more like real life contemporary one, the Peter Cook of the film. You know, this is a guy who, on his last day at university, is crying and saying it's over. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's over. Oh, my student days are over. It's over. He's never going to be this brilliant again.
Yeah.
And he rips the piss out of Joseph Cotton's fusty old academic don. But the thing is, he's never even going to reach that status.
Yeah.
His whole life ends on that day. So he's got nothing else to do but crawl into a bottle. And then the
Yeah.
irony, as Kris Kristofferson says, the reason why he's mates with him, he's the only man he knows worth getting drunk with.
Yeah.
It's a tragic,
It's
horrible.
heartbreaking.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a guy who had principles, had ideas, had visions, and then reached his peak far too early to the point where he's just. It's like it's not even a lapdog, because a lapdog would suggest he was on one side particularly. It's not even
Yeah.
that. He's just flotsam. He's just floating through life, and it's really heartbreaking and poignant to see. Yeah, and of course, nobody did heartbreaking poignancy like Hurt.
Oh yeah, it's so strange to see him as a young man and see that he had that understanding of what it means to have a wasted life at an extraordinarily precocious age. There's a deep sadness to him even in his youth.
I think, without the risk of trying to smear John Hurt's good name, I think he probably knew it could have happened to him.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's possibly the driving thing in a performance like this. The idea that, if he doesn't knock the drink on the head, or he doesn't pack in the hell-raising days, this could happen to him. And he probably
yes,
knew people like that as well. There's probably people he went to drama school with that never made it. He's probably thinking of like
yeah.
the Viv McCarrolls of life, the Withnails of life that he's probably very, very familiar with.
I mean, all of these comparisons are bang on, but I want to throw another one in the pot. I think he's the Falstaff to Kris
Yes,
Kristofferson's
yes,
King Henry. I
yes,
think
very much so. Yeah, yeah.
that's his role here. He's the person who's great fun to be around, but there is no way to progress without ditching this man. And the other interesting thing about him is that, like, Falstaff gets properly left behind. Falstaff gets genuinely shut out. But Irvine keeps coming back, and every time he comes back, it forms a sort of counterpoint to what Averill, the Kris Kristofferson character, is doing, because Averill and Irvine share similar beliefs. They're certainly good friends. Irvine makes most of the same critiques of the way that the landowners are treating the immigrant labourers that Averill does.
Yeah.
But Irvine is still class bound. Irvine can't leave the world of Canton and the other villains because it's just his place and he knows his place. And that's, that idea of knowing your place is as damaging to him as a rich man with a conscience as it is to all of the poorer characters.
Absolutely. And this is another reason why I think this film doesn't work in America, because it's a film about class, and America is
Yes.
constantly told that they are a classless society.
Yeah.
They don't want to be reminded that that's a lie, that is just
Yeah. Yeah.
absolute bollocks. The whole world operates on class. Why would they be any different? It
Yeah.
is absolutely a film about class. And again, it's just, they don't want to hear that. They don't
Mm,
see that of themselves. When Americans make westerns, they see what they want to be.
mm,
This is a
yeah.
western that shows you how it was, and
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't like that. They don't like that idea at all.
It's that scene where Averill and Irvine first reunite when it's after this big Harvard prologue. Averill's gone out to Wyoming to seek his fortune, and we followed him for a while doing some pretty admirable stuff. And I was watching the film for the first time and I was enjoying it, but part of me was thinking the shoe was going to drop here, right? There's going to come a point where I see why this is hated. That pool scene with Averil, where they talk about their university days and how much they miss them. Firstly, it's heartbreaking. It's so good, so emotionally powerful. Kristofferson and Hurd are so great in it. But then also that's when he goes out and he confronts Averil, he confronts the landowners with Irvine sort of perched behind him as this like silent reinforcement, which is like the most effectual thing that Irvine can do. That's the limit of how you can press for change within
Yeah.
this structure. Just sit there and be the angel on his shoulder.
Yeah.
And as you say, the landowners push back and they say, Averil, you have betrayed your class. You know, it would almost be kinder if they'd said betrayed your race, because we've seen that in Westerns. We've seen the Searchers,
Yeah,
we've
that's
seen
true. Yeah.
Hombre, but they say to him, you have betrayed your class by siding with these labourers. And yeah, from then on, the film's politics are really on the surface and they're really electric.
That's absolutely it, because it is about immigrant labour, people who come to a land wanting a better life for themselves, and the establishment, the people with money, don't want that to happen, and they victimise and they prejudice and they discriminate against them. Where have we heard this before? It's still happening now.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
still happens now. They can't catch a break because they're the other.
yeah.
That's all it boils down to, and it's people don't want to hear that. That's why I
Mm,
think it's such a maligned film, because people just don't want. It's not the fact that it's over 3 hours long. It's not the fact that. I mean, I don't know if it was the same for you, because like you say, you saw it in the theater. When I
mm.
watched the Blu-ray, and when I had it on video years ago as well, the first half hour is impenetrable in terms of sound design. I could
Yeah, yeah,
barely hear anything.
yeah.
Now, did that rectify anything at the cinema, or was it just still really
It's
muffled?
it is a bit like that, but I the impression that I got was that Cimino in this is going for that McCabe and Mrs. Miller vibe,
Mm,
where, for the first sort of 20-30 minutes of McCabe and Mrs. Miller, the sound is also impenetrable. And Altman wanted the sound to be impenetrable. He's like, well, I'm just going to pitch you into this world and you're going to have to focus. I'm going to cast this magnetic, gorgeous movie star Warren Beatty, and I'm going to make you study the screen to work
yeah.
out which of these dirt-covered bastards is like
Good
Warren
name for a
Beatty.
band. Good name for a band.
Yeah,
They had a peel session, didn't they? Coming up tonight is the Dirt Covered Bastards. No, but
but
I
I think
completely agree
that's
with
what he's
that.
going for.
I
Yeah,
mean, I find it hard because I'm like, oh God, I got the Blu-ray thinking, brilliant, there'll be subtitles. I'll finally know what the fuck they're saying. No, there's no subtitles. Shit.
that's unjustifiable.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
really is. It really
yeah,
is. But then, from the context you just made, then it's perfect sense, because it's a film that lasts over 3 hours. What better way of getting you to actually focus than
yeah,
say, buckle up, because you're gonna have to pay some fucking attention here.
yeah,
It's not put your phone down. You're not going to be able to just pick bits of it up by looking at your phone and just going,
yeah,
yeah, he said that then, didn't he? You need to seriously go, what the fuck's going on? And
yeah.
once he's got you there like that, that's it, isn't it?
I mean, the other thing about the McCabe and Mrs. Miller comparison is it did make me reflect on how Westerns were just never a big part of the new Hollywood. And it's like McCabe and Mrs. Miller didn't make much money. It didn't
No,
matter
no,
because, it didn't cost 50 million or whatever the hell Heaven's Gate cost. But it is very easy for me to think of great 70s Westerns, but they weren't hits. Even Peckinpah didn't have a Wild Bunch sized
no.
hit every
I mean, you'd
time.
only really say Clint Eastwood was the only sort of like, guy still flying the flag for Westerns. And again, you know, it speaks of what sort of Fordian conservative politics was going on in his films, that they were accepted,
Yeah,
because every other sort of there were outliers around it, weren't there? You've got
yeah,
the Jesse James one with Robert Robert Duvall, The Great Minnesota Raid, I
Great
think it's
Northfield,
called.
Minnesota
That's it,
raid.
yeah.
Got the
Brilliant
Missouri
film.
break.
Very Missouri Breaks, yeah. Even Altman's other one, the Buffalo Bill film.
Buffalo
You know,
Bill and the Indians, yeah.
these are full on. These truly do deserve the term revisionist Western. You know,
Yes.
it's a term that gets bandied about a lot. You know, certainly in the 70s. But I mean, I'm a big fan of Clint Eastwood. We did a Westerns not pop screen, but we did a Westerns podcast for the Geek Show, didn't we?
For Uncut, yeah, where we
yeah,
did High Plains Drifter.
High Plains Drifter. That was the one I was trying to think of then. It's a revisionist Western, don't get me wrong, it really is. But that's probably the last of Eastwood really sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit, other than the Outlaw Josie Wales, but I don't know. It's the last one of him really pushing the boundary and having a bit of that Leone spirit that is gone for the rest of his films in the 70s and 80s, I think.
Yeah, certainly with some of the 80s ones, like Pale Rider is a very, which I also love, but is a very deliberate effort to try and bring back the trad kind of pre-spaghetti era of westerns.
I think some people say revisionist because they've not got short back and sides, they've got long hair and it's muddy. You know, it's a bit more like like the old sepia tone photographs you see in in museums and that, rather than like some guy clearly from the 50s with a quiff and a DA. You know?
Speaking of sepia tones, what's the color like on your Blu-ray? Because this is shot by Vilma Sigmund, so it looks great, but it's appeared in a lot of different like versions in terms of the film's look and colors.
Um,
Do you remember it being a particularly kind of sepia toned film?
a little bit in places. I think there was
Yeah.
definitely some intentions going on in places. I think, yeah. There's a few scenes definitely. Certainly, again, early on scenes seem very sepia, and then
Yeah.
you've got that wonderful the rollerblades scene, which is
Yes.
just beautiful. I mean, that is proper David Lean stuff, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that has a kind of not sepia as such, but really pale cinematography
Yes. Yeah.
that is just it's beautiful to behold. But it's a fantastic scene all around that.
Do you think this is the only Western named after a roller skating rink? Because it seems pretty unusual for the genre.
Could be. Did you know as well? While we're on the subject of the roller skating rink, and that Jeff Bridges is supposed to be playing his great grandfather in this, or his great grandfather.
I heard that, yeah, because I might have missed this because one of the things with these cast of thousands films is you have to be very sharp to notice the first time you see someone. But yeah, it's something like the James L. Bridges roller rink, and
Something like that, yeah. Or is it
my
H Bridges?
something like
L or
that,
H,
yeah.
something like that, yeah.
My
But yeah,
memory of the film is that you see that before you see Jeff Bridges, and I saw it and thought, wouldn't it be funny if, oh, he does own it. Oh,
it is.
okay, right.
Yeah, he apparently did some of his genealogy and just thought, oh yeah, that's like my
Yeah.
ancestor. I'm going to play up to that, and and he also owns Bridges bought the log cabin that Kris
Did.
Kristofferson lives in, doesn't he?
Out of anyone, Jeff Bridges got the most out of this film. A lot of people lost their shirts, but Jeff Bridges, he got the log cabin, he got to find out about his genealogy, he made lifelong friends with Kris Kristofferson. He got to jam with Kris Kristofferson because there was fuck all else to do while
No,
Cimino just set up these shots.
this is like the new Hollywood version of Who Do You Think You Are, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But you
He
think,
got
like,
to find out his genealogy.
there were so many like nightmare shoots around this time, and this always gets bracketed in with them. But you hear something like that, and you think, "Yeah, I'll take that over Fitzcarraldo." Actually,
God, yeah, wouldn't you just?
yeah,
But no, I mean, I think it is a film that has been deeply maligned. I don't think it's a perfect film. I think there's some takes that go on forever, and you just think, "Oh, I want to done that." Who am I to say that? Oh, I want to done that, but you know what I mean. You watch it, and you think, "Oh, this doesn't feel particularly right," but I'm in every time when I watch it, and it's a big commitment over 3 hours film, really.
Yeah.
But I manage it each and every time, and I just think it's because there's not much else like it.
No.
Certainly
I
not in
mean,
that genre. Certainly not at that time.
no way, no way. I think the most obvious comparison point these days, and one which is not original to me, is some of Scorsese's recent historical epics. Thinking about Gangs of New York, Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah, yeah,
It's amazing, really,
yeah.
that he can get big budgets to make something that so resembles one of Hollywood's most damaging bombs. But I would say to anyone who hasn't seen Heaven's Gate, if you do like Gangs of New York, if you do like Killers of the Flower Moon, chances are you're going to like this as well.
That's it. I think the other one that we touched on, you brought up, was McCabe and Mrs. Miller. I think,
Yeah,
in a way, these are two films from the same era that didn't do great. One got quite a good modest reputation for itself, but this was lambasted. But
yeah,
yet they have proved so influential, haven't they? I mean,
mm,
Deadwood. There's a lot of Deadwood. There's a
yeah,
lot in both of these films in Deadwood, and
totally.
you're absolutely right to say that that kind of HBO sort of approach is definitely influencing what Scorsese's doing nowadays.
Yeah,
To the point where you wonder if Scorsese even knows he's channeling this film, or whether he
yeah.
just thinks he's channeling Deadwood.
I think he would. I think, Scorsese's always, I mean, God, what doesn't he know about film?
Yeah,
But
that
I
is true.
think
That is true.
he
It's
had
whether
an
he would give
anecdote.
it. It's whether he would give Cimino the credit, though.
I think he would. He spoke positively about Heaven's Gate,
Oh,
and
good, good.
yeah, he said that, when it came out, it wasn't like one of those things where, a movie bombs now and it's a story about that movie. It doesn't affect anything else. But he said,
Yeah.
when Heaven's Gate came out, we had been out with Raging Bull for about 12 days. And suddenly our box office fell off a cliff as well. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the end of evil. It really was like
This is
prog giving way
that.
to punk.
That's very true.
Suddenly,
Yeah, because the
yeah,
knives were out, weren't they? It's like
yeah,
your days are over.
yeah,
The auteur-led wunderkind days of like New Hollywood are over, and it's sad, really, because it became. There's a lot of good films that happened in the '80s, but it became films by committee, really, didn't it?
yeah, yeah.
And that's where that had its own successes. I think that's where a lot of high concept ideas came from, because you found you had to pitch films in
Mm,
certain ways by that point, and you had to say it's such a thing and such a thing, but it's such a thing, and that
yeah,
that reaches a committee, doesn't it? And I
yeah.
mean, I'm writing something at the moment for Arrow, which I can't really say what it is, but I find myself quoting Die Hard an awful lot, or referencing Die Hard an awful lot, and how that was such a high concept movie, and then in the '90s it was like, let's Die Hard on a plane,
Yeah.
or it's Die Hard on a boat, or it's Die Hard on a train. You had to constantly just keep, you know,
And there's
putting
some,
one thing with another thing and locking it
yeah,
together to sell it, really.
and there's some older directors who flourished in that.
Mm,
Samuel Fuller got White Dog, which I think is a masterpiece made, because he didn't like go into it as an allegory for racism or anything like that. He just said Jaws with paws, and it's like, but of course he can do that because he's a pulp tabloid trained kind of guy. He
yeah,
knows how to deliver the gut punch and sneak the intellectual meat in under the radar. But for
that's it.
people who were used to being able to say, well, I want to make an artistic exploration of, they're never going to thrive there.
No,
And a lot of that,
Shimono's never gonna, and that's why I end up doing like really
yeah,
odd films, not really
totally.
great films,
Yeah,
often overseas rather than, because he's not the type, you know, he'd have. It's funny when you mention Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, because that's a buddy film. You know, you
Yeah.
just say it's a buddy film with Clint Eastwood and Jeff Bridges,
Yeah.
and they're robbing a bank. You say, oh, great, sign that check. What you don't say is, but it's very homoerotic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing, isn't it? But he didn't learn to. You could get away with it maybe at that point when people were just signing checks in New Hollywood, but in the 80s, I doubt he could have. He'd have to have. I don't think he had that thing in him to say to do the bullshit like Samuel Fuller did. I think I think he couldn't stop himself saying, "But I want it to be homoerotic and quite." You know, I think that would have come out of him, and then he gone, "No."
Here's a theory then. Here's a theory. Do you suppose that the new Hollywood directors who survived or even thrived through the 80s are the ones who went through that kind of B-movie training school and the ones who were trained in kind of smuggling things in under the radar, that your Scorseses and your Coppolas could still, like, they knew the art of not being fully honest about what you want to do with the film?
I think I didn't even realize I was saying that really, but I think, yeah, that's a really interesting point you've made there, Graham, because I think that is absolutely the case. I think these are people who knew how to play the system. And they knew how to play the system because they got some good training from the likes of Corman and stuff like that, or they just understood inherently from from being a cineast like Scorsese to know that he will watch everything and anything, and he's seen things that's happened over here, and he thought, well, that's a film about this, but it's got this message in it, so I'll just sell it as a film about this, rather than. So yeah, I think that's true. Actually, yeah, that's really true, and I don't think Cimino had those chops really. I think that's his tragedy. But there's a lovely little quote that I do want to try and get in, which is I've got it on my review here, because I think it just sums up not only Cimino but sums up Kris Kristofferson as well. When he said he compared him to true artists, and he put, "I bet Michelangelo cared. I bet Picasso cared. Anybody who believes in his artistic vision, I bet they care."
Yeah.
And
I
that,
saw that in the documentary version of Final Cut, and I mean it's beautiful, and it says a lot about Kristofferson's honourable spirit and his
he's
loyalty.
such an honourable man. I mean, I said
Yeah.
when on Instagram when he passed away, I said, that's a true gentleman gone,
Yeah.
because I think he absolutely was a true gentleman, and I
But
think
I
that's.
also think it's worth pointing out that he followed it up by saying, I don't think I cared, or at least not enough, not as much as he did.
But is he just being really modest there? Because
I think so.
he's the
Yeah.
kind of guy who is like, I think he's the sort of musician turned actor who was just like, I'll just come in and just say the lines and try not bump into the furniture.
That's the
That's his.
country and Western spirit. You don't get too
Exactly.
pretentious about this. You're not an
Exactly.
artist. You're a
Exactly.
journeyman. Yeah. But it is a great performance. I think a genuinely great performance. And when
It
you
really is.
sort of see him there with his like salt and pepper beard and his waistcoat, and you just think that is the essence of like old school masculine cool.
Yeah. And there's a stillness to him as well, isn't there? There's an absolute stillness that
Yeah.
is really good. That you can't teach that.
No.
People have it or they don't, especially on screen, and you just can't teach it, I don't think. I think it's a very good performance, absolutely.
I think in the spirit of a tribute show that was not meant to be a tribute show, we should end it on that note. I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So just remind people, Mark, where they can find you online.
You can find me on Letterboxd. You can find me on the Geek Show. You can find me at We Are Cult, Horrified, Z Network. Where else? There's probably other places. I have a link tree on my Letterboxd, so you can always find me from there. If you find me Letterboxd, which is Mark Conliff, you can find all the things I write for on there. I've got. I should say as well that I've got an essay in Arrow Films' The Great Escape release coming out.
Of course.
That's coming out in December, which I think this might be out by then.
I think it's this is probably going to be early November, so get your Christmas lists ready.
Get your Christmas lists, write that to Santa, unless it's on television. Sometimes it is at Christmas, but get it anyway because it's good, and you get to read my essay. Has been known, hasn't it? In fact, that's how I start my essay, mentioning that it's always on at Christmas. But yeah, get it, because then you can read my essay. There we go.
As for me, I'm also on Letterboxd, search for Graham Williamson, and I'm on Instagram at Graham W Films. You can get more of this very podcast by subscribing to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/thegeekshow, where aside from a monthly bonus episode of Pop Screen, you also get monthly essays on classic Asian genre cinema, weekly reviews of The X-Files and Red Dwarf, and of course our big end of month mix-up podcast last night, which by the time this goes out, I will have just done an episode of, and I don't know what we'll have covered because it's just that kind of show. No idea.
Who knows?
Yeah. It's not one that we've researched as painstakingly as this. Let's put it that way.
No, not at all.
But until a fortnight's time, when Pop Screen will be back with what have we got? We've got a very different era's bomb. We've got an episode on Tank Girl coming out. The double bill that no one was particularly interested in, but
it's just as well you didn't ask me to go on that, because I'd have just banged on about how Rachel totally threw Emily Lloyd under the bus. The fucking bitch.
But until then, listeners. Not all of our shows are tribute shows. Until then, I've been Graham.
And I've been Mark.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.